anyone who has sort of a real reason to be
To
asking
ask,
for it
yeah.
should be asking only those two questions. Not what is your disability, just is it a service animal, and if so, is it trained for a particular task?
Welcome to the Disability Rights Montana podcast. We are here today to talk a bit about service animals.
Sure, yeah, and emotional support animals. I think we'll get into
And maybe
the differences because sometimes they're conflated. Yeah.
And a third one would also be like a therapy animal, I guess, too, is another kind of
Yeah,
word.
yeah, a word that's used. Yep. And then of course pets.
Yeah.
Another we can sort of pull it all apart.
Yeah.
Yep.
So to start, let's just define, I guess let's start from what the ADA says, a service animal, just like a technical definition. And I've got that here up, which is under the ADA, a service animal is defined as a dog that has been individually trained to do work or perform tasks for an individual with a disability. The tasks performed by the dog must be directly related to the person's disability.
Yep. And that, so the ADA is a relatively big law that is cut up into different sections. That applies to section 2 and 3. Those are places of public accommodations. And then you've also got section 1, or title 1 as they call it, that is about your employment, your place of employment. And that is different because many employers, probably most places of employment, aren't just open up to the general public where you can just walk in. So there are different rules for places like government services and public accommodations that are just open to the general public. That definition applies to those. And then places that are more, private employers type place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about what a service animal is, the definition includes the word task.
Yeah.
What type of task? I mean, there are many tasks a service animal can do. What type of task? Which is like, what are some tasks that service animals do?
Oh man, there are things like, I think a lot of people are familiar with dogs that assist with moving about a community, either helping someone who is blind recognize if there's traffic coming up, or to navigate different barriers that are in the environment. But there are also dogs that help you get through the environment because they can help you get up if you fall down. They can help pull you forward, get you moving. There are dogs that can smell changes in your body chemistry and alert you that or recognize that you are starting to maybe get some precursors to having a seizure or some other event that you might need to, say, lay down. And it's better that you lay down and the dog jumps up on your leg to let you know this is coming than it hitting you out of the blue and you falling down. So an amazing number of things that dogs can be trained to do. We've got a new staff person who has a degree in that type of thing, has done a lot of that. We should bring her in and maybe she can talk about all the various things that she's trained animals to do, not just dogs, and kind of how that works and what that process is. I think that'd be a good deep dive into that training aspect of it. But absolutely, service animal, that is the key, has to be trained for a particular task related to your disability.
And it is possible for a service animal to be trained to do multiple tasks. That's a possibility too. They're not limited to one task. So if someone has if you're a person with a visual disability, say you are blind and you cannot see. You cannot see. You use a service animal to navigate public streets, for example. That service animal could help you navigate public streets. That service animal could also, if you happen to be, in your examples, if you happen to be a person who's blind and maybe also a person who experiences seizures, it is possible that one service animal could be trained to do two things.
Sure. Or you could have two service animals.
Service animals.
Yes.
And two service animals is, I think, typically what the maximum I've seen someone have two service animals. I mean,
In real life, the people I've met, that's I've known people with two service animals. Under the new regulations for flying, we didn't talk about flying. We talked about businesses on the ground. There are also different rules for flying. They have put a limit on you can only have two if you are flying, but you can have two if you are flying.
and so there are disabilities, physical disabilities in which service animals can be trained to do a task. There are invisible disabilities such as a person with epilepsy, for example. The service animal could be trained to alert for a seizure.
Sure, or it could be anxiety. Could be the dog is trained to recognize when you are getting to the point of being anxious enough that you should remove yourself from the situation, and it is trained to get your attention before you get to the point of I'm starting to have a panic attack. So that's another, like, there are many invisible disabilities that could be something someone uses a trained service animal for.
Peanut allergy in a
Sure.
school
Yeah,
environment.
yeah.
Those are specific tasks. Those are service animals. What is an emotional support animal? How do we differentiate between a service animal and an ESA, emotional support animal?
Well, another aspect to service animals, though, I wanted to say in that ADA context. Again, we're talking about public settings in the ADA context. We can come back to employment in a second. Has to be trained for a particular purpose related to your disability. But there are also now species restrictions around what can be a service animal. So under that definition in the regulations, it's limited to dogs, any species of dog, and miniature horses. And again, we can talk to our new staff person about that because she has particular experience with miniature horses as well. But a service, so that's a service animal. But an emotional support animal doesn't have to be limited to a particular species, and it doesn't have to be trained, but it does have to provide some benefit related to your disability. So I know sometimes I get questions like, well, how can it provide a benefit if it isn't trained to do anything? And sometimes being a dog is enough. Like, just being warm and cuddly is enough to make you not be anxious in a big social situation. You don't need it trained to avoid a panic attack. You just need it there as emotional support. Sometimes a cat is enough. I don't know if you can train cats. We'll have to ask Anna if you can train cats. But like a cat can be an emotional support animal.
Well, and you, I think you just said this. An emotional support animal does not need to be trained to perform a specific task. That's, I think, one of the major differences. I used to work as a accommodations counselor on a university campus, and one of the things that we would often engage with campus services on, specifically the folks running dorms, is making sure that if someone had an ESA, that it was, I guess, our university had some kind of policy where we needed to make sure that it was an ESA.
Okay.
Our office at the time, what you're saying, there is a limit on species for service animals. There's parameters, there isn't for ESAs.
Sure.
And we've, in my past employment, I've seen all sorts of ESAs: fish, hamster, guinea pig, dog, cat. You name it. A very funny story. There was a maintenance worker in one of the dorms who found a rat, and I get so much pleasure out of this little happening, is that our office did so much outreach about what an ESA is, that this university employee found a rat and captured it, contacted our office to make sure that a student in this dorm was not missing an ESA that was a rat. It was not an ESA. And so it was, that situation was followed through in accordance with that maintenance worker's job duties. But it was just such a great moment to say, like, this person had the consciousness to think like, oh, is this something that I should ask a question about? And it was just, it was a great experience.
That's a great, good experience at a university around a service animal. One of my very first cases as a lawyer was to look into my alma mater's practices around service animals, because we received a complaint and verified that the housing folks at the school had put up signs, posted a letter on everyone's door that said, service animals are allowed, pets are not allowed. These are the apartments that are allowed to have service animals. These are, not. And so they outed everybody who had a service animal and thus had a disability. Mm-hmm. And that was not necessarily something that folks knew was coming or wanted to happen. That their private information about how they get through the world and use I was saying service animal, even I conflated a lot. An emotional support animal was being outed to everybody.
The signs for the rooms were for ESAs.
Yes, okay. For emotional support animals. And they would let everyone know, this person's allowed to have a cat because of their disability. This person's allowed to have a dog because of their disability. And so we got them to change that practice and just do the training like you all did, and said, hey, if you see an animal around, we've got rules. If you shouldn't have an animal, don't have one. Mm-hmm. If you need to have one, come to us and we'll approve it and you'll have one. Mm-hmm. And mind your own business. Mm-hmm. If someone else has one and you're not sure why, it's probably a legit reason.
And typically in most scenarios, whether it's a service animal, an ESA, or, unfortunately someone who might bring in an animal that's not either of those to somewhere, a business or residence or what have you, most, unless the animal's a danger, barking, trying to bite someone or whatever, it's really no reason to move too quickly in the situation.
Right.
Ask the questions and figure it out. It's typically gonna get sorted.
The questions are very straightforward. 2 questions. Is that a service animal? Or if you're in a public place where only service animals are necessarily allowed? And if so, is it trained to provide a particular service related to your disability? That's it.
So those 2 questions are the 2 questions fairly nationally, broadly, that anyone is allowed to ask. Your state may have different rules around.
Well, let me stop you there, though. If you're responsible for the business, you should be asking the question. If you're just a busybody at the grocery store,
that's a good,
mind your own business.
Yeah, that's a good. Yes. Yeah, if you're just a customer, go about your own day. You don't need you don't need to be a vigilante service animal
zealot. And so that, yes, anyone who has sort of a real reason to be asking for it should be asking only those 2 questions. Not what is your disability, just is it a service animal, and if so, is it trained for a particular task?
Business owners, landlords, employers,
manager at the hardware store.
Sure. Yeah. They are. Those are the people that could ask those 2 questions. Yeah. And again, is it a service animal?
Yeah.
Question 1. That answer is yes or no.
Right.
Is it trained to perform? Is the second question? Is it trained to perform a specific task, or what task it's trained to perform?
Well, you can ask what task is it trained to perform. But that second question is really redundant of the first question. Is it a service animal? In order to be a service animal, it must be trained to provide a particular thing. But you cannot ask, what's the disability? So what's the task it's trained to perform? And that could be, it moves me along when I'm getting anxious. It's like, okay, that kind of outs what it is. But it's like, well, it lets me know of environmental factors I need to be aware of. All right. Are you a doctor? Are you a trained anthrozoologist? Then probably that's all you're going to get and really need and be able to use. You're kind of just double checking when someone says it's a service animal, that they're not confusing it with an emotional support animal. If they say, yeah, it's a service animal, and say, great, what's it trained to do? And say, oh, well, it's just, it's my dog, but it's housebroken. That's not enough. That's being housebroken is not related to your disability.
And so service animal, we're kind of talking about service animals. We're kind of talking about ESAs. There's that other word that sometimes people use, therapy animal,
Sure.
therapy dog. In my experience, I've seen therapy animals be brought in somewhere.
Yeah.
There's a handler. They're bringing us an animal, typically a dog, to a location for interaction with a group of people or an individual. Yeah.
And in that, no individual has a particular right to that. That's just a calm dog or a calm cat being a calm cat or a calm dog, just being chill and knowing not every dog can walk into a place of employment or a daycare center or a nursing home or some place where there's a lot of people and tolerate being petted 100 times in 2 hours. So there is some training. I'm not suggesting there isn't, but it isn't particular to the individual, so it's not going to be a service animal. And it may or may not be doing anything related to a disability, and therefore it may or may not be a service, an emotional support animal, but it wouldn't be your emotional support animal. It's someone else is bringing it into an environment to encourage the situation to, whatever is going on there to be sort of a chill environment, because there's this dog and people relate to dogs better than humans sometimes, or cats or gerbils or.
And the handler for that therapy animal typically is in some way performing a therapeutic service. And so
they may be an animal, someone who uses animals for therapy. People use horses for therapy and equine therapy. They may be trained in that way, or they just may be a handler of dogs and, do a nice benefit to cheer up people's day. It's a very broad category of animal-human interface.
And that, the interaction that a person gets to have with a therapy animal, say we hire, we're doing a training and we bring in someone to have a therapy animal. It is typically, at some point I've seen there, many people will pet the therapy animal, will interact physically with the therapy animal.
That's kind of the point, right? Yeah.
Which is very different than if someone were to walk in our office with a service animal.
Yeah.
So let's talk about maybe a little bit of etiquette around a service animal. We talked about the question that certain people should be asking to make sure, it's a service animal. Great. If you are that bystander, that other person in the store, that other person on the subway, that other person at work, how should I be acting? Like, what's my...
Well, first, just like a person, think to yourself, there's another human being here in the world. How do I normally interact with other human beings? Let me do that. And there's a dog there, but that dog is there in service to, working for that other human being. They're not a pet at a pet shop. They're not a pet at my house. They're not a pet at my family member or friend's house. They're not a pet. They are a piece of equipment, for lack of a better word. I do treat it like that. I wouldn't go up and touch someone's white cane if they use that to get around. I wouldn't go up and touch someone's wheelchair.
Lean on a wheelchair.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't go up and touch another human being if I don't know. You're a friend of mine, I might come up and give you a hug. If you are a friend of mine and you have a service animal, you've probably told me how to interact with that service animal. And if it's okay to acknowledge it, I will acknowledge it. If it's best not to, I won't. But for the most part, you'll see service animals, usually dogs, sitting at the foot of the person who is working with them or in their lap if they're a smaller animal. And that's where they are useful to that individual. And if, I mean, I am at times very outgoing and outspoken, but generally, when I'm walking through the world, I'm pretty reserved, introverted, don't engage with folks. I'm never going to ask to touch your dog of any sort, whether it's a service animal or a pet. I'm just not that interested in your animal. Probably not really even that interested in you. I'm just like going about my life. Mm-hmm. So if you are the type of person who just can't help yourself, you're like, oh, there is this really cute dog. Ask, but be totally ready to hear, no, it's really distracting to them. Like, I got to get through my day. That means they need to get through their day. And if they're being distracted all the time, they're not working. Other people are like, oh, absolutely. They're very social and they can do what they're doing for me by doing that. You're not going to wear them out. You're not going to distract them too much. So I would say you come back to like, how do you do that? Like, be a person, talk to the person.
The default is person first.
Yeah.
I mean, and maybe, in our office, we're a disability rights organization, a civil rights organization. Many people in our office might just default to that already. You show up, you see someone with a service animal, you're looking at the person. The person comes first. The service animal is a side item that should not be the focus of your conversation with the person who uses a service animal.
Yeah.
I've had this experience. I'm walking, I have a pet. And I think that's the other thing we want to address too, just a general pet. So like at my house, I have a dog and it's just a pet. It is not a service animal. It is not an ESA. It is not a therapy animal. I have it for pure enjoyment, for my personal self, to throw a ball, go bird hunting, whatever we want to do. It's a family pet. When I walk that pet down the street, there are many people I come across who I am invisible as a human, and they just see the dog and they go straight for the animal. Totally fine.
I mean, that's why some people have dogs, is it helps them interact with the world. But it's also like a stereotypical trope in movies. Like there's going to be a meet cute where somebody brings their dog to the dog park and then another person brings their dog to the dog park and they get to know each other and fall in love over their dogs getting to know each other. I mean, like that is our culture and how we relate to animals. But you also have to recognize that like people are just trying to get through their day. So like if everywhere you go, it's I got the dog, like it's a big, just a big to do everywhere, that's got to get old. So just keep that in mind and I'm not saying be standoffish. Approach people as you normally would approach people. If you're a big gregarious person and that's what you do, be you. But if you wouldn't be introducing yourself to that person for any other reason than their dog, then just leave them alone.
And there is a visual cue of a service animal that's often there, but not required to be there. And that is the vest. A vest is a cue for people that, that's a service animal. A dog might be wearing a vest that says service animal.
Oh, if it is, assume it is, and treat it as invisible as you possibly, like that is your signal. Just like if you see me going to Costco and I've got my big can headphones on, that's because I do not want to talk to anybody. I can't. I just need to get some stuff at Costco, but I cannot. I got to drown out the world, and I just need to get through this task. And I send off some good leave me alone vibes. Like I rode a public transportation for 11 years, and every seat could be filled except the one next to me. That's going to be the last one anyone fills because it's really clear. So if you see a vest, I'd treat it that way. Of like, this person wants you to know that this is a service animal, so you leave it alone. If you don't, the person, if they want you to calm down with the animal, they'll let you know politely, like, hey. But there is no requirement for a vest. There's no requirement for like a special harness that you often see people who are using a dog for vision related disabilities. That just helps the person interact with the animal. That there is assistive technology, a particular type of harness that lets me tell more what's going on with the dog than just a loose lead that's there. And then that gets back to a service animal must be well behaved and under the control of the handler, and that's one of the rules around service animals. I'm a little. I mean, I know that needs to be there, but and I believe it's an important thing. Of course, it needs to be under control, but so does every human who walks in the door. I mean, if we're again thinking about the animal as just an appendage of the human, if any human walked into a grocery store and decided to go to the bathroom right in the middle of the grocery store, you'd kick them out. So if their service animals doing the same thing, you can kick them out. That's not something a service animal should be doing, and not something that anyone has to tolerate. But again, you don't need to tolerate that with the human directly themselves either.
And so the default should be, at least, because you and I have a disability rights background, the default for both of us is like, there's an animal. It's probably I always am like, it's probably a service animal. Right. Now in Montana, there is something written in the law about service animals in training having the same mobility rights in terms of going about the world as a fully trained service animal. And that, I just want to be like, and I'll link that that part of the code below. But even a service animal in training needs to be under control.
Yes, and they do need to have a vest.
Yes,
to signify, because it may be less obvious because they are still being trained.
But I think that's important to know, is that they have already reached a certain level of behavioral training as an animal that, okay, we can start to expose this animal to larger groups of people. But they do if you're going to do that training, they still need to be under your control. And if in the example, if they use the bathroom in the middle of the grocery store, you probably are going to be asked to leave, and that's okay for a business owner or manager or staff member to do.
Right. And then you get to, we're talking about like, presume the best out of people. I mean, that's the way I walk through the world. And then are there going to be people who try to misuse that and say they have a service animal when they don't? I think that's what that question of, okay, so it's a service animal, what's it trained to do? If you aren't savvy enough to know to lie about the second one, then you might get caught. But at what, are we going to sort of have a full investigation and figure out like, okay, people are going to lie. People lie all the time. And they're not good people, right? Like, these are despicable people who pretend to have a service animal when they don't. The same sort of despicable people who would use an accessible parking spot when they don't need to. But if we are going to respect the ability of someone just to get through their life, imagine legitimately having a service animal, and every single time you go anywhere and you're interacting with other people, you go to the grocery store, you go to the hardware store, you go to the gas station, you go to work, every single time some new person's coming up to you and say, prove it. Prove you got a disability. Prove you that dog's supposed to be here. That can get really old really fast. And it's not going anywhere. That's going to be your life forever. If that's the world we set up that is so hypercritical and suspicious, to try and find those few highly despicable people who are going to lie anyways. And if they're going to lie and they get caught a couple times, they'll figure out a better way to lie. I mean, that's what liars do, right? They lie. So there is some some thought of like, what if someone's trying to get one over? And we've talked about this in some of the other podcasts we've done, that thought really starts to drive a lot of energy around those very few non-disabled people who are doing despicable things, instead of just getting people with disabilities what they need. And the vast majority of people who are trying to bring a service animal into a business legitimately have a service animal. Or, there might be also this other group that they have an emotional support animal and they didn't really ever know the distinction between the two, that it has to be particularly trained for something, not just it helps me avoid a panic attack, but it comes up and tells me you are about to have a panic attack. Please remove yourself from this situation for 15, 20 minutes, an hour, or just be done for the day, whatever you need. And that is trained, right? And so that is something that a lot of folks maybe don't know some of those nuances. So I hope this video helps start to parse that apart, and you can look at some of the resources we'll have linked where you can say, okay, now what is my animal and what is trained enough, and who can do the training.
And that is a good point to bring up, that idea of training and who can do the training. Anyone can train a service animal. If I needed a service animal, I could train my own service animal.
Sure.
And I think a part, especially when I was at the university, it did kind of eat at me a little bit, is folks that were going out to, and maybe this was more so with like ESAs. There are businesses set up to give a certification of an ESA. And most of these are scams, by the way. Yeah. Don't go online and give someone $25, $50, $75, $100 for them to make a fake, like a PDF that says your dog's an ESA.
First of all, there is no requirement that you have any identification like that, period. So if someone's looking for it, just let them know that's not required. But two, don't pay for it. I mean, that gets to the whole, if that's what you're doing to prove you have a service animal, then it's not trained to do something. You can't meet the actual qualifications, and it's just part of a larger elaborate ruse.
Now, there are people who do train service animals,
yes.
and that it does take time. So for some people that might use, say, like a power chair, the service animal, maybe they need a service animal to assist in opening doors or picking something up off the floor, grabbing stuff around their house for them. They might not have the ability as the person who uses the power chair to train the animal. So they will have to, if a service animal is something that they need to move about their daily life, they will have to find someone else to train it. And there may be an exchange of money for that.
Absolutely.
For that, what is essentially then a product. This person has trained an animal. They now meet these requirements, do these things, or have these certain commands, are able to move about certain types of environments. Yeah, someone's most likely gonna have to pay for that animal.
And they may themselves, that provider, certify to say, yes, it does this thing. And that, we're not talking about that. No. We're just talking about a laminated card you can order, or a special vest that has magic words on it that won't let. It's like, that's not really worth your investment. Figuring out what your actual rights are and how to engage people in a conversation about them that doesn't get into your personal business, but does let them quickly know, yep, this is legit, let's move on. That's what's most important.
There's no requirement to have a certification, a card, that laminated card, a piece of paper that says, this is an ESA, this is a service animal. Now, what happens if I'm a person who's moving and I'm trying to rent an apartment?
Sure.
How do I move through that scenario without, with balancing my privacy, but also trying not to be discriminated against?
All right. So what I would suggest is pause for a second and say, okay, I'm looking to rent an apartment. Then where am I looking to use this animal? This animal that helps me with my disability. We don't know yet. Does it have to be an emotional support animal, or does it have to be trained and be a service animal, or is it just a pet? It just is great to have around. So housing, not open to the general public. My apartment, I don't want just any rando walking through. So it's not like a business or a government service, what we've been talking about with service animals. It is housing. And housing is covered by the Federal Fair Housing Act and local, state, and city and county laws around housing. So that's in a different world than the ADA. And with that come a different set of rules. And the floor is lower. You don't need to have training. So you don't need a service animal in housing. You can have an emotional support animal in housing. And what you may see in a housing application is a pet deposit that's required or a no pets policy. Both of those don't apply if you have a disability and you have a service animal that you need related to your disability. So again, a service animal needs to be, they're doing something related to your disability, but they don't have to be trained to do that thing. They're just, the example I use is a dog is cute and cuddly and affectionate because it's a dog. That's evolutionarily, we've sort of bred them to be that and not wolves. If you're not doing any more training related to your disability than just they're a good companion and keep me from spiraling into my depression even deeper, then great. That's a service animal.
What's an ESA?
Or sorry, an employment and an emotional support animal. Yeah. Yes. Thank you for catching me there. And so that is allowed in housing. You don't need to have specialized training in housing, and you can't be charged extra for it. And so they can't say no pets allowed, or pets you can have, but you have to pay this big deposit, or you have to pay extra each month for a pet. That doesn't apply. You do, just like if you were to damage your apartment, you'd have to pay if your animal damages your apartment. If you pee in the corner every Friday night because you had too much to drink, and they have to replace the carpet, you're going to have to pay for that. If your dog does that because you don't walk it while you're at work, then you're going to have to pay for that. That's much like a service animal out in the world.
So foundationally, and if we did confuse service animal and ESA in this example of renting an apartment, either one, whether it's a service animal trained to perform a specific task for a person with a disability, or an ESA who brings a general comfort to that person with a disability, both of those in the housing scenario, the pet deposit or no animal, if that's stated on like an application or something, those things do not apply.
Correct. Now that is, as a lawyer, I have to say that there are always exceptions. So very small housing providers, like I'm going to rent a room in my basement, not covered by the Federal Fair Housing Act. So whenever you start on this, go to the resources, say, okay, like we started here, where am I trying to use this animal? Is it out in public or is it in a private setting? Okay, if it's out in public, we're probably looking at the Americans with Disabilities Act. But if it's out in a federal building, then we go to the Rehabilitation Act. If it is in a more private setting, then is it housing or is it at work? And both of those are really more of an accommodation or a let's change how the standard rule applies to everybody. But because of me and my particular disability, we will modify the rule. And that's like we'll come back to that concept, reasonable accommodations and modifications throughout all disability rights talk. That will be a common concept of, I know that's the general rule, but because of my disability, I'd like an exception to that rule. And so you'd enter into that conversation. In housing, it's pretty straightforward. You're allowed to have it. In employment, you may or may not. If you have a job like you or I have, where we sit at a desk for most of the day in our own offices, there is zero reason why an employer would be able to say, no, you can't have your dog at your emotional support dog at work. I think that's probably going to have an easy time proving that. But if you work welding as an offshore welder on an oil derrick, you're probably not going to bring your emotional support animal. Like, it's just not safe for you, the animal, the other people. Like, how would you even get it there? If you are working in a fast food kitchen, having a dog there might be problematic, but you'd have to go through a conversation with your
right. Not impossible to have a service animal in these settings, whether it's whether it's a food service setting, a hospital setting, some on a university campus. I've had questions about service animals in laboratories, lab
Sure.
settings.
Yeah.
Not impossible, but there may be additional conversation to
Yep.
have.
And like, how are we going to make this work is the way I would approach it. I have, as a general rule, both as a business manager, leader, and as a disability lawyer, general rule that the first person in that conversation to draw a line and say, this is the way it's going to be, is usually the one that's going to lose the legal fight later. So be open and curious about how can we make this work. I want to figure out how to make this work. And so that would be how I'd approach it in employment, because every employment situation is going to be very different. When it comes to housing, it's relatively straightforward. You can use your emotional support animal or service animal in your own apartment, and in order to get in and out of the apartment.
To get into a little more nitty gritty with the apartment example,
Sure.
at what point in an application process would I disclose that information? Do I have to disclose that information? Can I just apply and day one of my lease show up with my animal?
Well, I will tell you this. I used to be on the board of a fair housing organization, a group that identifies, investigates, and tries to fix violations of fair housing law, whether it's racial discrimination, disability discrimination, nation of origin, family status. Disability is nationally the highest category of discrimination in housing. So know that as you approach looking for housing, when possible, try to avoid letting the potential landlord know you have a disability. Now, I hate saying that. I think people should be who they are and should be proud of who they are, and they should see things that others see as disabilities as strengths and personal characteristics of their own that makes them unique in who they are. But in order to avoid discrimination, try and hide it.
And odds are that as a person with a disability, and especially with housing, with the situations that I've known I've been close to, the reality is that odds are you as the person with a disability are gonna know more than the landlord about your rights, because that's the world you live in, and
Yep.
you've done the research, and it is a balance. It's a balance of trying to figure out, how do I get through this system that obviously was not thinking of me when they set up this application, and how do it kind of goes back to just what we were talking about earlier, just being a human. Like, how can I just respectfully live my life? I need this service animal. There's these questions. I know what my rights are. How do I get through this? As a person renting, there are laws around, tenant landlord laws. But it can often feel like, as the person submitting the application, that you are not in that position of power. You really are working toward, man, I need housing. I really would like this person to say yes to me. There's 10 other people applying, 50 other people applying to live in this building, or and there is that feeling too. And that's it does weigh on a person. I think that's some of that, just that ongoing stress that can happen with someone just living with a disability. And that happens amongst all disabilities for various reasons. In this case, that the animal question.
And so I'm not suggesting you sneak the dog or the cat in the back stairwell in order to get them into your apartment. But I would say, when you're competing for that apartment, when they're like, I haven't locked it up yet, get your application in, provide all the information that's needed, but don't offer, oh, and by the way, I've got a service animal or an emotional support animal, or you're okay with emotional support animals, right? there's not an "are you okay with" if we're talking about the larger landlords, not the individual one-off ones I was talking about before that aren't covered by the federal law, and you'd have to check your state and local laws to see what is covered in your jurisdiction. But I would say, in as much as possible, try to get as deep as you can into that application process. Create a paper trail. You're emailing, you're texting, saying, "Great, I really liked seeing the apartment. I think I'd really like to do it. Is it still available?" Get them to, "Yes, it is. Great. I've got a paper trail for that." So then when I submit my application and on it asks, "Do you have an animal that you're going to be having there?" That they don't come back and say, "Oh, sorry, we just rented it." It's like, well, I just texted you an hour ago and you said it was available. So that looks a lot worse than you called up immediately and said, "Hey, me and my son and my dog are looking for a place." And it's like, "Oh no, we don't take dogs." It's like, "Oh, but it's a service animal." I'm like, "Nope, still don't do it." Where's the paper trail to show that they were mistreating you?
And if you're moving to a new place, my suggestion certainly would be, if you do have an ESA or a service animal, to contact either the PNA in your state or maybe an independent living center. There may be companies in towns that are known to just be more aware of a broader scope of people who are renting from them. They might be aware that people have ESAs and service animals, and there might be companies that are known to cause issues with people who have ESAs and service animals. So
Yes.
I can't say for certain which ones those are, but if you are moving to a new location, ask your community, ask the disability community, "Hey, these are the things I like. I want a water view. I want to be next to a grocery store. I want," whatever it is, are the things that you want. And that's a good place to start. Otherwise it can be tiring to kind of be throwing that spaghetti at the wall, trying to find a place to live. It's a hustle. Housing itself is it's a bit wild.
You mentioned a PNA, and I don't know if folks know what that is, but we should do a deep dive one of these videos on what is a PNA. P and A, protection and advocacy system. That's what
we are.
We are, right. But we can
not just us, but the rest of our staff,
right?
And our whole organization.
And there are 57 of organizations like us around the country. So we should talk about that and bring someone in who can talk about the independent living movement and independent living centers and all of the things they offer. That'd be a great way to talk about some of the supports that you can receive when, one, you're just trying to live your life and not be asked a zillion questions every time you go to the grocery store, and also not face discrimination when you're in those settings. And how do you structure your supports in a way that allow you to get through discrimination, get through sort of all of the things you need to set up in order to live in the community in the way you do, because it's been set up for people who maybe live differently.
Great. Well, this is a lot of great information. And if you have any questions about service animals, if you're in Montana, again, you're welcome to call our office. There's also Montana Fair Housing is the organization in Montana. They're based in Butte that does, sometimes we refer people over there and that might be the first spot to go if you have a housing question. And they're great. They're great folks over there. So we'll put that information below as well to Montana Fair Housing. But yeah, if you're in any other state, PNA, Independent Living Centers, or your disability community, reach out on social media, whatever your contacts are. So if you have any other questions, let us know. Do you have anything else?
I would really love to hear from, maybe we could set up a Zoom interview with someone, or they could come into our lavish studios here and maybe talk to us about using a service animal. Like, what are the great things about using a service animal? What are some of the annoying things that you have to put up with people and service animals? And have a conversation about that. Because talking to us two is fine to get some basic sort of rights knowledge, but some of that real world stuff, that'd be great to have actual service or emotional support animal users telling their stories. And like I mentioned before, we have to get Anna in here to talk about training service animals and all the various ways service animals can support people. So this topic is not done. It is a topic that comes up a ton in all sorts of spaces, in public, in housing, in employment, in air travel. And we'll do some more if folks are interested. Just let us know in the comments if you, one, want to be on one of these subsequent videos, or two, there's a particular topic within service animals or emotional support animals you'd like to see addressed.
Yeah, so leave a comment below, call our office, or email us, and we'll leave all that contact information for you to get at. So thanks for being here, and we'll catch you on the next one.